I'm Joan Griffin, and I'm here with you and Reading in the Wild. And today we're going to talk about books that have an environmental flavor. I started putting this list together to celebrate Earth Month, and now we have a new 2026 list for you and a whole new set of books. So today I'm going to start with books about rivers. And I chose these three books because not only do they have a similar central theme, but they're vastly different in what kind of books they are, what kind of stories they are. But I thought they were a perfect example of how one subject can be used in a variety of different storytelling ways. So hopefully there's at least one book and maybe two of these three that just leap out at you as something that you want to read. So the three books I'm going to talk to you about today are Go as a River by Shelley Reed. This is an historical novel but it's based on true events that really happened, and it has a strong central female character. The second book is called Brave the Wild River. This is a biography. Actually a dual biography about two women botanists who made the first ever run down the Colorado River for women. And the third book is called Is a River Alive? And it's by Robert McFarlane. And this is a nonfiction book. It's really a hybrid memoir. So we're going to talk about all three of those and highlight them. So we're going to start with Go as a River by Shelley Reed, which is historical fiction, but it's based on real events. It's set in Colorado back in the 1960s when the Army Corps of Engineers built a dam on a river, the Gunnison River, and it flooded a town, the town of Iola. Well, all of the people who lived in Iola were given heads up to leave, and their farms were purchased by the government, pennies on the dollar, and people left. But this one young woman whose family just sort of disappears on her, she decides that she's got to save the peach trees. Her family was famous for their peaches. So she is on a mission to save the peach trees before the level of the dammed lake covers her town and her farm. But along the way, of course, she falls in love and goes through the whole coming of age process. But we learn a lot about man-made environmental disasters that come into conflict with human life, human endeavors, homes, farms, etc. So I want to read to you a couple of the reviews. First of all, this is a debut novel by the author, which means it's her first ever book that she's written. And it's become a bestseller. It's actually been translated into 34 different languages. She's a professor at Western Colorado University, where she teaches writing and English, American literature, environmental studies, and a fifth-generation Coloradan. So she loves Colorado. She loves the Rocky Mountains. So this story, besides being a really elegantly written historical fiction about interesting characters, it's also kind of an ode to the beauty of the Colorado that she knows from living there her whole entire life. Couple of reviews I want to read. The Sunday Times says it is a lush tale of female resilience and evokes the awe-inspiring beauty of the Colorado landscape with affection. And another one says, with gorgeous descriptions of the great outdoors, an illicit love story, and an unforgettable protagonist, Go as a River offers something for everyone. And I personally love historical fiction. That's kind of my favorite genre to read. And I think it's very popular. I think next to romance, it's the most popular genre that Americans read. And thousands of books are consumed every year. My favorites are the ones that are actually based on real events, not just set in a historic time frame, but actually based on real events. And this one is. But our main character is not a real person, though she feels very, very real when you read it. So that's one I highly recommend. The second one that I want to talk to you about is Brave the Wild River. Let me find it here in my pile. So it has a great subtitle. Let me read it to you. The Untold Story of Two Women Who Mapped the Botany of the Grand Canyon. So this is by Melissa Sevigny, and it is about two women back in 1938. So roll your eyes back in your head and think about 1938 and the role of women in science. It wasn't very big. Why? Because women were not allowed in a lot of different colleges and universities to study. And so these two women were really groundbreakers, and I'm going to look here because I've forgotten their names. Elzada Clover and Lois Jotter. And they're botanists, highly trained botanists. And they realized that no one has ever mapped or cataloged the plants that grow in and around the Grand Canyon. And they learn of an opportunity to go down the river in boats with a small company, and they think, oh, this would be great, because they're both kind of outdoorsy people, and they think this will be great. We'll go down the river and we'll catalog. This is an opportunity for us to do a first. And they're very serious scientists. But no woman has ever made it all the way through the Grand Canyon on a boat. And only a handful of men have ever made it all the way through. It's considered to be the most dangerous river in America, maybe the world at the time. Of course, now people do it all the time, right? There's a boat leaving every 17 minutes or something. But this is back in the day of wooden boats and wooden oars, and it's a whole different sort of thing. What I found, and these are two real scientists, this really happened. One of the most hysterical things I think about it is they were very serious. And they were taking along all their scientific equipment, and their goal was to not only catalog, but to collect items and properly press them. And when their boats pulled into a dock where they would restock, they were going to send them back to the university, where they would then later, after the whole thing was over, go back and catalog them and preserve them. And it became a huge national event. In the 1930s, we're still deep in the Depression. People are looking for all sorts of things to entertain them, and one of them was stories like this in the news. And so every time they would pull into a dock, there would be a swarm of newspaper folks who were asking them questions and posting it all over the front pages of every newspaper in the country. Did they ask them about the plants that they found? Did they ask them about the techniques they were going to use? Nope. They said, how are you washing your hair? Are you going to wear makeup? Will you wear pants? Or will you dress properly in a skirt? And it drove the women absolutely bananas. But a couple of times they were a day or two late getting into the next planned stop. And the whole country went crazy because they were sure they had drowned and they would never see them again. Anyway, it's a very well-researched book. So it feels very, like every ounce of it is absolute true fact. But it's also a super fun adventure. And that twist of Are you going to wear makeup? How will you wash your hair? Was just like comedy relief every time. So I want to share a couple of reviews with you. So the New York Times book review said, it's a cascade of a story. Get it? Cascade is falling water. A cascade of a story colored by sun and water and driven by courage and determination. The San Francisco Chronicle says, thrilling, expertly paced, warm-hearted, at once an adventure tale and a dual biography of two unusually determined and capable heroines. But I like this one by Ash Davidson, who wrote Damnation Spring, which was a book that was on my last year's list. She writes, whip smart, funny, meticulously researched, and beautifully written. So, very different from the first book that I talked about, but also with a river at its center, and I think something that you will really enjoy reading. The third book is called Is a River Alive? And this is by Robert Macfarlane, who is considered to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, nature writer in the country in this generation, is the way the Wall Street Journal describes Macfarlane. The New York Times calls Macfarlane a naturalist who can unfurl a sentence with the breathless ease of a master angler. Get it? Fishing in a river. He's an author of 20 books, so he's written a lot of different things. You may, if you read a lot of environmental things, you may have read one of his before. But this one is different than the other two. I know I've described to you before what a hybrid memoir is, but I'll review just in case. A hybrid memoir is where it's partly a person's personal experiences, personal responses, emotions, and their actions and things that happen to them. But the other half is a focus on something else. And in this case, it's a focus on his travels around the world looking at rivers. So he visits 3 different places extensively. He visits in the Amazon area, though not the Amazon River, a river like that through the jungles. He visits rivers in Asia, in India specifically, and he visits a river in Canada, kind of in the area where they're doing a lot of forestry. But what ties it all together, what flows beautifully through the whole book, is the little stream that runs behind his own backyard. And in fact, the first scene is of he and his young son walking along that river, and his son asks him, "Is a river alive?" And that became the title for this book. And he uses that conversation with his son to talk about his own experiences with rivers. And then he takes us on those trips to those different rivers where we meet different experts. Experts on the pollution that's hurting the river, experts on the fungi that grow along the riverside, experts on the fish or the plants. So it's this lovely back and forth between his own personal experiences and feelings, including with his son at home, with all this scientific information and conversation with experts. Beautifully written, really, really fascinating. Another review you might be interested in. Everyone who has ever found something to love in a river should find something to love in this book. And I thought, since we live in this place where we're surrounded by rivers, right? I live up in Colfax, and we have the Bear River on one side of town and the American River on the other. Those people who live up in Nevada City Grass Valley, they've got their Yuba River. Down here in Auburn, not only do you have the American River, which predominates the landscape, but all the different tributaries that flow into it, Dry Creek and whatnot, on the way down the hill. So we are a landscape made by rivers. The water carving out of the mountains and down and following it all the way to the San Francisco Bay, through the Sacramento Delta. So if you love something about one of our rivers, I think you'll find things to love in each of these books about rivers. So 3 different books. Robert McFarlane's is River Alive. Melissa Sevigny's Brave the Wild River. And the third is Go as a River by Shelley Reed. Now, I often talk to you about what would I do with a book club who was reading one of these books. And I was thinking it's all about fresh water. It's all about the connection between humans and rivers and the little bit of water on our planet that is fresh and drinkable as well as beautiful. And so definitely your book club, you need to have water, and not in plastic bottles. You need a pitcher of water and beautiful goblets to pour that fresh water in. And I think that would be really fun to celebrate, and do toasts with the water to the water. The Brave the Wild River is a perfect book to talk more at length about women in science. And I think that's a huge discussion you could have with that book, that women's roles and women's contributions have really been minimized for a long time. And it would be fun maybe to look up and get a list of a whole bunch of women in science that have made strides. And so that would be a fun thing. Or also to have a discussion of, most of us have been to the Grand Canyon, whether we stood on the south rim and looked down, or we actually hiked a little ways into it, or did some rafting. Those kind of personal experiences would be really fun. And I think coming dressed like you were going to go on a hike along a river, because really all of these books are about that environment and walking along the river. Go as a River, she's trying to preserve it in some way. Brave the Wild River, they're trying to investigate it. And Is a River Alive, they're trying to save the rivers. So I think that would be wonderful. Also, we have a couple of really good conservation groups in our neighborhood who work on saving, cleaning up our local rivers. The Dry Creek Conservancy, for example, the American River Conservancy, the Bear Yuba Land Trust, Circle, all of them are about saving, cleaning our rivers. And in fact, I know for a fact that there's a program on beavers in our local rivers being put on by the Dry Creek Conservancy later this month. And so you could check that out. Okay, so that brings us to the end, and I want to share a last few things. First, what caught my eye with these books is the river and our proximity to the river. These are 3 superb writers, a brand new first-time writer, a super experienced writer, and a journalist turned author. They're 3 odes to beautiful landscape. And each of these people writes about something that's personal to them. Reed is writing about Colorado, where she lives, even though she's telling an historic fiction book. Sevigny is talking to us about Arizona and the Grand Canyon, which is where she was raised and loves and gets out and hikes all the time. And McFarlane is talking to us about rivers, including the little stream that runs behind his home. And I think that brings a lot of heart to these books that we don't always see. When authors write about something that's near and dear to them, I think it makes it much more powerful. They also come from 3 different eras: the 1930s, the 1960s, and the 2020s. And I think that's a nice comparison. And I told you I chose these books because I thought they were a great example of how you can take one subject and approach it in 3 or a million radical different directions, and you have very unique stories, despite the fact that the subject, in theory, is similar. On that note, I'd like to share with you my own book. I wrote a book called Force of Nature, and the subtitle is 3 Women Tackle the John Muir Trail. And so this is an adventure memoir about our very Sierra Nevada and the 3 women, myself included, who walked the length of the John Muir Trail, 200 miles. If you like an adventure story, if you like nature stories about California, pick it up. I also want to share with you the brand new Read Your Way Through Earth Month for the year 2026, and has 30 brand new books on the list. And you can find this on my website at joangriffin.us. I have 3 new books that I'm going to share with you next month, and I'm just going to give you the titles to do a little tantalizing here. We're going to look at 3 books that have a central theme of a hiking adventure. One is called A Walk in the Woods by Kevin Fedarko, which one of the best books I read all year long. Havoc, which is a mystery thriller by Cam Torrens, and Everest and the Rest of Us by James Nerig, which is a little bit of a philosophy as why do we choose to go on adventures. So, I'm Joan Griffin. This is Reading in the Wild, and I will see you next month.